Thank you all very much for being here midweek at the Center for Archival Futures, or CAFE, here at the University of Maryland, College Park, and the College of Information. I'm Diana Marsh. I'm an assistant professor in archives and digital curation. And this is our flagship talk series. First, on Wednesdays, we host a wide range of speakers. You can find recordings of our previous events that go all the way back to 2021, some good gems in there, and our future events coming up as well. In the vein of today's event, folks here might be interested on April 11th. We're hosting a most of the day Wikipedia Wikidata Editathon, focused on reconnecting anthropologists' historical papers with communities and thinking about how to use Wikidata and Wikipedia to better connect those records. And on April 23rd, we're going to be hosting Warren Booker, who's a wonderful Indigenous scholar here from Australia, visiting the states here to do research on ancestor records, and we'll be talking about her postdoctoral research. So that'll be very exciting on April 23rd. So look out for that. We also have a talk next Wednesday, and I'm going to pass it to Jess.
Yeah, next Wednesday, we're going to have another one of our speaker series. That one's going to be completely virtual, and that's coming to us from the Association for Asian American Studies, and specifically, they're going to have a panel drawn from their Cultural Heritage Archives, Library and Information Science group, shorthand Chalice there. So they're going to be talking about the future of Asian American archives in the U.S.
So take a look at that, and we really hope to see you at other events and to get on our list. Thanks so much. So I want to acknowledge before we start that we're beaming in from College Park, which is located on the ancestral territories of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank and their Indigenous kin and neighbors. As members of the University of Maryland, we want to acknowledge that as a land-grant university, we stole 202,000 acres from Indigenous peoples that were distributed in funds to the university through the Morrill Act in 1862. And I think we have a link to a project a previous MLIS student did with our libraries to try to expose some of the original documentation that led to that, to those agreements. We want to acknowledge the separation that those and many other acts of colonialism, assimilation, and genocide, which included archival collecting, generated between Indigenous peoples and their homelands. We want to honor the continued power and resilience and patience of Indigenous communities and nations, and celebrate all of the collaborative indigenizing work that we're doing in our institutions. And we're really excited today to have Maria Day to talk about one of those efforts here in Maryland. We want to further acknowledge the University of Maryland's connections to slavery and to generations of racialized trauma rooted in the institution. As a member of the College of Universities Studying Slavery, the University of Maryland is undertaking the 1856 project, which is uniquely positioned in our special collections and university archives to look at investigating and illuminating those histories and moving toward greater accountability and reconciliation. We want to remind everybody in the audience, so we'll wait to the end for questions. We have a new tradition here in CAFE, following some other academic norms in other colleges and universities, to allow the first questions to come from students in our programs. So for those of you who are students, especially if you're an MLIS student or part of our Student Archivists of Maryland group, we encourage you to be thinking about your questions as Maria is speaking, and you're welcome to ask them in the chat or by raising your hand here in the room at the talk. So with all of that, I'm very excited to introduce Maria Day. Maria Day serves as Senior Director of Special Collections, Conservation, and Library Services at the Maryland State Archives, where she's worked as an archivist since 2008. In addition to overseeing daily operations in Special Collections and Conservation, she serves as co-director of the Indigenous Peoples Program. Prior to her work at the archives, she was a museum educator and director of public programs for Historic Annapolis and graduate lecturer in art history at the University of Maryland. And Maria's specialist areas include maps, prints, artwork on paper, American history and art, architecture and design from 1850 to 1950. And we both learned earlier today that we both studied photography in past lives, so that was really cool. She earned her degrees in history of art at Indiana University of Bloomington. For anyone who was at iConference, we all got to see that wonderful campus and meet other iSchool nerds there last week. And at the University of Maryland, College Park, here, master's in 2005. And I'll just say on a personal note, I've been so impressed with the work that Maria and her team has been leading, the relationship building that they've been doing, and the sort of support that they've been able to sort of garner from leadership in the institution. I had the chance to meet Drew Shuptar-Rayvis, who's one of the oral historians that you hear about, I'm sure, at a program in Santa Fe last year. And he talked a lot about how much it's meant to sort of do that relationship building and to think about histories of indigeneity here in Maryland. So I'm really excited to have Maria here to talk about developing the Maryland State Archives Indigenous Records website for engagement and access. Thank you so much for being here. Should do that since I was the one who.
Oops. I think it's on that. All right, perfect.
Share.
Perfect.
Share.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, got it. Thank you for that technical pause. And I'm gonna get this down so it's not distracting. So thank you, Diana, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really honored to be here. I was telling her earlier, I went to my master's program here in College Park, so it's always nice to come back. And it's always nice to re-engage with students here. I do a lot of mentoring of high school students, but one-on-one, so it's nice to see a room full and a Zoom full of people. It's really great. So I'm hoping to keep my remarks pretty short so that there's ample time for questions. So think of your questions. I would love to hear them. This is a project that is very much still in motion. It is not done by any means. So I just want to acknowledge how important it is that every person has a perspective that they can offer something. And this is a project that's going to take a lot of minds to continue to develop. So I just want to say that at the outset. So I work for the Maryland State Archives. That is located in Annapolis, which is part of the ancestral homeland of the Piscataway. And as an agency, we also have land that is part of the ancestral land of not only the Piscataway, but the Susquehannock peoples. And we are the repository of state government's permanent records at the Maryland State Archives. We also have a lot of county and municipal records at the Maryland State Archives. And the other portion of that archiving that we do is records relating to the history and culture of the state of Maryland very broadly. That's part of what I manage at the Maryland State Archives. We call it our special collections, but really it is the cultural and historical record for the state. And in order to do that, we have to open that out to a lot of different communities. And I'm going to talk about one aspect of the work I do today. This is one small portion of my purview at the Maryland State Archives. So that while I am focusing on that wholly today, just realize I wear many hats and I do a lot of different things. And this is just one thing that I give my energy to. And it is probably my favorite thing that I do right now because of the things that I'm going to talk to you about. So let's do this. And it does it, I'm just going to click. There we go. Okay, so where I'm going with this presentation, give you a little bit of a roadmap here. First, I'm going to talk about the challenge of finding Indigenous people in Maryland's historical record. And there are, I know probably here and also on Zoom, there are some people who've had some opportunities to work on a bit of that here at University of Maryland, College Park. And you will recognize some of the things that I say because they will be very similar. But you might hear about some additional things that we have had to do in the course of our work here at the Maryland State Archives that deals with the layers of time, the colonial time period, the time before the colonial time period, and then also now and in the future as well. So we'll talk about challenges. I'm also going to talk about the opportunities. One of the most exciting parts of this whole project for me has been the partnerships that I and my colleague Megan Cranen and other people who are members of this team have been able to develop with tribal peoples, and particularly those who are indigenous to a specific region of the state, but others as well. And we'll talk about that. I will also talk about co-creating with those partners, building resources together, so that it's not us doing it for someone, but us talking about what would work, what would be helpful, and also what is helping to open out the public record to tribes, to everybody, to the whole of the public. Also, I'm going to talk about the future of our work. I know a lot of dark clouds are around. I've been hearing a lot of, young people in particular who are emerging into this field talk about, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So I'm going to tell you some things that I think, my practical perspectives on that, but especially why I'm hopeful that this work will continue. So that's the roadmap. I'm going to go ahead and say admit so that we get this. Yeah, okay, here we go. So Dr. Marsh gave an excellent land acknowledgement for this area. I'm sure you're well familiar with that, everyone in the room, but I want to just give you a slight different perspective on that. Up in the upper corner of my slide here, you'll see a pink circle. That's approximately where College Park is. You'll see a sort of V of two waterways. Those are the Potomac River and the Anacostia River, both indigenous names, by the way. And you have to imagine that this region before colonial settlement by the English happened was a very different place than what we are familiar with College Park today, which is fairly urban. I give you a picture of Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge on the Eastern Shore, just as by the way of thinking about the wetlands in Maryland along the riverbanks, just to sort of help keep that picture in your mind. The map that I'm using to pinpoint where College Park approximately is the 1612 map by Captain John Smith. There is a copy in the Maryland State Archives holdings of this map. And I'm using it because it's at the point that Smith shows up with people who are soon to become explorers and settlers and colonizers of the New World, that he starts to write down places on the map. For good or for ill, he captured a lot of what he thought of as indigenous community names. Got a lot of them wrong, I understand. But he also recorded those names, and those names have become valuable into the future, those that he managed to write onto this map. Others are lost. But at the point at which he's writing things down, some of them are saved by his work. And also, he got a lot of things wrong. There are, oh, I met a leader here, so I'm going to put a little wigwam symbol. Is that really where the leader was? Who knows? I mean, some of it is lost to time. Archaeology of this area, because it's wetlands, may or may not ever yield. Yes, there was a particular settlement here, but just think about what was saved and also what was lost when you look at maps from the 17th century like Smith's, because I think that's important. Oops, I'm pressing the wrong button. Okay, so it was just Maryland Day yesterday, March the 25th. A lot of people don't always think about Maryland Day as being something that is an actual day. We celebrate it on campus here at College Park on a particular day, but it's not always March 25th. That's how it's recorded, as the day that the English colonists who arrived by vessels called the Ark and the Dove. You're seeing an illustration here by a modern artist on the left-hand side over here. And the Ark and the Dove arrive at St. Clements Island, and they disembark as colonists on the 25th of March. And they have a big feast of celebration for this purpose. But notice that this particular artist also included an Indigenous person or persons, actually two, with their canoe, looking out at these crazy people in their vessel. But over on this side, I'm showing you a different perspective. So I want to overlay the two perspectives here. I was fortunate enough to be at a public event where some of the Piscataway Canoe were exhibiting some of their wampum belts. And this one for them is a particular, represents a treaty that was really significant between Lord Baltimore, who was proprietor of the new English colony of Maryland. On April 20th, 1666, he makes a treaty with the Piscataway. And this particular wampum belt, which is made out of shells, shows native leaders and an English ship. And it marks in their memory an understanding of this treaty occurring at a particular time. There are many treaties between the Piscataway and Lord Baltimore, but this is one of the early ones and an important one. So I just want to talk about how every history, okay, remember the word story is in there, has multiple perspectives. And you all know that, but I'm saying it here because I think it's really important to think about how we privileged in English language the written word, and that's not always what's privileged in the context of an Indigenous culture. They may privilege the oral traditions, the stories of their people passed down not in writing, but in speaking and in sharing in that way. So just want to talk about those different perspectives. And then you layer on top of that something else, which is, I'm gonna keep pressing it wrong. There we go. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm gonna try to use the keyboard. That's a good idea. Thank you. So there are many tribes, who call parts of this region that we now call Maryland their homelands. And I'm showing you two here. I'm going to show you two more on a different slide, but I want to show you first the ones that sort of overlay the area that we are currently today situated in here in College Park. The Piscataway peoples and the Susquehannock tribes, and they all are people whose homelands are in this region and whose larger spheres, you can see the colors in lighter yellow, reach out further and further on these two maps, which I'll talk about in a second. The darker yellows are often by certain people within these tribes considered to be their traditional homelands as best they can kind of overlay on a current map. But if it gets lighter and lighter, you're also seeing spheres of influence where they traded, they hunted, they fished, other things. And so these two tribes overlap. Okay, so they claim lands that are the same as their homelands in certain cases. So I want you to think about that and know that these maps were made with a consultation that was done by my colleague, Dr. Ryan Coons, who was part of the Maryland State Arts Council. They had constituents who wanted to know something about which tribes should I acknowledge in my area. And so they went out and they paid consultants within tribes who were willing to work with them over a number of years on this project. They consulted for compensation to get these maps created. Are they perfect maps? No, but they give you some notion of what lands are part of the geographical sphere of influence of these two particular tribes. Their website is full of 7 or 8 different maps at this point with many different tribes. I'm going to show you 2 more maps. These are both located on what is now the eastern shore of Maryland, the Delmarva Peninsula. The Pocomoke Indian tribe, which is a state recognized tribe, talk a little bit about that in a moment, and the Pocomoke Indian Nation, which is not a recognized tribe at the state or federal level, and yet they have ancestry. They are part of a tribe that had homelands in this part of the southern part of the peninsula that's called the Delmarva Peninsula today. And yes, there's overlap again. So I just showed you 4 perspectives on Maryland history that are Indigenous. There are more. this is complicated. This region is full of different tribes who had different parts of this region as home. Okay, so I just want you to know that and be okay with the fact that there's overlap. Because in an English context, like John Smith, you are here, you are here, you are here, trying to pinpoint people. And that's not how anyone from any Indigenous tribe that I have spoken to sees things. Okay, they're aware of maps, of course, but their maps are oral traditions. My people, this is home to us, you know, and in a different way than you might live in Prince George's County, Maryland, or you might live in Howard County, Maryland, or Anne Arundel County, Maryland. We position ourselves differently in a 21st century English-speaking context. So what has my group been doing? We have been doing what I like to call slow history research. Now, there are ways to automate this, and we've been in discussion about what options there may be to now automate, because yes, handwritten records can be read by a machine now. There's, especially in a clerk's hand, which is a very even hand over a period of time, it's a little easier to do that, but a lot of what we are now doing at the Maryland State Archives with Indigenous records are the slow history research of actually reading documents and using eyes and knowledge of the project to kind of help inform, as information professionals, yeah, this is not an English word. This should be in our database. None of us are language experts. We were able to very wonderfully get the support and hire a cultural anthropologist who's a member of the Pocomoke Indian Nation, Drew Shuptar-Rayvis, to help consult with us for about a year and a half. That was really helpful to us. We need more of that, and I need more funding to enable that continued kind of work. But in the meantime, most of us who work on this project are not experts in native languages. We are not anthropologists. We are people who have history training or librarian training, archival training, and we're pointing that effort towards finding the non-English words in our records the slow way. Yes, reading documents that are not transcribed yet. So I wanted you to see this picture, because this is the work that has to be done. And either we have to automate it and then have eyes on the results from the automation, because no machine is as good as your own eyes, or we have to do it the hard way, which is what we've been doing up till now, with the caveat that at the very beginning, we were working with a body of already transcribed records that were already online. And we focused our energies there because we already had the transcription. And there was indexing to those records done in the early 20th century. So it was the absolute right place to start, but we have a long road to go to collect data from county records across the region, okay, across the state of Maryland. A long road to go. So why this is hard. Some of you have been involved in projects here, have understood the complexities of 17th and 18th century English, which is that they did not have dictionaries in the same way that we have dictionaries, where you spell a word one way. You remember spelling bees when you're young? Yeah, none of that, none of that. If you heard the word Potomac spoken by somebody in the 1700s or in the 1800s, there are 30 different ways so far that we have found that you might have spelled that one word. Now multiply this by every Algonquian and Iroquoian word in our records. Whoa. Okay, that is an information professional's problem to solve. Okay, I may not be an expert in native languages, but I am an information professional. And I work with people who are dynamite database experts because we have our own in-house information technology staff. And to say that they were a key part of the success of this is underestimating the abilities of these people. Excellent, excellent database specialists, okay? And I am not that. I am competent in my technical abilities, but I am not a database professional. And there are some really, really rock star people on our staff. So they helped me and my colleague Megan figure out ways that we could take this kind of a mess and turn it into an index that's usable by the public in some pretty innovative ways. So we are going to look at that. So spelling variations is a challenge. However, I'm also going to point out that one of the awesome things that results from this deep dive in the historical record are names of people who might appear in more than one record, so that you can kind of track some things about them depending on what they did and what their business was. Are they mentioned in land record transactions? Are they mentioned in testimony for a judicial case in one county or another? Did they come to speak before some of the Maryland colony officials to make a treaty or whatever? In this particular case, I'm just for fun, while I was working on the project focused on Dorchester County, Maryland, I looked at, compared notes with the person who was my archival assistant, and I just looked at one record volume in Dorchester County records. And this is just like a handful of names off the spreadsheet that I was like, wow, there are people here. There are men and women whose names we now know because of this project. Some of them may have been known before, may have been found by other historians, other scholars, other local history researchers, other Native people who've done the deep dive themselves, because I've met some Indigenous people in Maryland who have been doing deep dives into history, and you've maybe met some of them here in College Park. But to be able to name somebody is big. Now, there's also some interesting pseudonyms that happen. Robin Hood pops up in a bunch of records in an Indigenous context. So you can search Mayis, our database, and find Robin Hood, because we know they're Indigenous, they're identified. Interesting lingo. Was that a moniker given to this person in an Indigenous context, or did they adopt it? I find that fascinating. But anyway, I just wanted to show you why this is so significant to people, because we are finding the names of people from 300 years ago, 250 years ago. This is big, okay? Because eventually we have to go into the 20th century records and start to meet up, right? But to start with the original records, where it's very obvious by certain names, or it's obvious by the context in the historical record that someone is Indigenous, that's where it becomes important, is you can link these things up. So how did we put this out there? We started a indexing program in a serious way during the pandemic. We had the time, we had resources, because we actually had some high school students, in fact, who were trying to finish their field studies in a time when not many field studies were available. So there were a number of people who gave their time to this project as remote workers, because they're like, hey, I need to finish my master's degree. Or in some cases, there was one or two people who were trying to finish an undergraduate degree and needed field work to do that. But in any case, working together, kind of troubleshooting as we went, we came up with a model that worked. And between 2020 and 2022, we tackled the records, pretty much all of the already indexed, already transcribed records of Archives of Maryland online. Those records have been out there since the very early days of the internet, and somewhere in the 1990s is when they went online. Transcribed. People can use them, but each volume was separate, and you have to search each volume's index in order to find. didn't take long at all for us to realize that even in one volume, you're already finding so many references to Indigenous people, Indigenous geographical spaces, rivers, communities, tribal names. All of those things are listed. Occasionally native words too, of other kinds of words. Like the name wampum or the word wampum will appear. You know, if somebody's making trade, that might happen. That's beads that are traded. So this website, which you can all go to and explore in your time, really resulted from 2 years hard effort, deep diving those records that were already digitized, already transcribed, already indexed. And then from there, we knew once that was done, we had enough of a core sample of 40 plus volumes of Archives of Maryland online that we could start putting it out there. Is it perfect? No. I don't even imagine that it will be perfect for a long time to come, but it's out there and people can use it. People like you, people who are from Indigenous tribes, scholars of all shapes and sizes out there doing the work. We're going to improve this over time. But the first thing was to make it public so that it can be used, because it collates volumes and volumes of historical records. But there's another piece to this, and we'll talk about what gets added on top of that in a minute. But I want to talk to you. Remember I showed you the slide for Pocomoke that's spelled 30 different ways? So how do we deal with that? So after talking back and forth with our database specialists at the archives, here's a word, very hard word to say in English, Askamanaconsin. I learned that from some really awesome people. This was an important Indian town on the Eastern Shore, part of the Pocomoke Paramountcy. And my colleagues who I worked with let me know about this place. Tribal members had deep dive researched this already. There's a picture of me and my colleague Megan standing with a couple of members of the Pocomoke Indian Nation in the preview of today's lecture, right? My first slide. So, Askamanaconsin, we've got references to it. There are some other potential spellings here that we found. There's not a distinct reference, but using a sort of Soundex type data set, like how could the word sound phonetically spelled different ways? There are certain, I can't name the software because, again, not the database specialist. I'm happy to talk to them and ask them what they're using if anyone needs to know. But the important thing is we found this word in different ways. In fact, this up here is probably a variant as well. But I'm not quite as confident to make the connection. And again, I want to work at some point with language experts to kind of come up with how do we refine this index. But for now, I'm happy that it's just out there. And when you click on those links, you get references to the historical document. And if it's something that's already been transcribed, already online, it goes directly there. If not, there's a reference to something that's a government record somewhere at the Maryland State Archives, which can be accessed by the public. So we have the past that I've talked a lot about. I'm going to also talk about the now. And the now for us in this project is there's a 21st century component that we were always conscious of. From the very beginning of this project, we worked with the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs. They're part of a sister agency, the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. And it is that particular body, the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs, that represents people who are Indigenous to Maryland and Indigenous people who live and work in Maryland. And there are a host of tribes that fall under the sort of representation of the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs. So those folks were incredibly helpful at the beginning of our project. Also, we got involved through our networks and through other library programs, other scholarly programs out there. We got involved in participating in some really important programs, and out of that came some partnerships. So connections made by the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs, as well as participation of me and my colleague Megan mostly with various projects that were already ongoing, working on discovering Indigenous cultures and histories that we can then make more publicly visible in this region. So the two partnerships that I'm focusing on here were really key to add a oral history project to the website that we developed, Mayis. Mayis, by the way, I didn't define it earlier when I showed you the slide. Mayis is one of a number of different native words that we were offered when we said, hey, we're gonna create a website that's a path or a guide to Indigenous records. What word in your language or in a language that you are familiar of relating to this region would you recommend? And this was one of the words, Mayis. It's very easy to say, and it needs a path or to go on in a language, Lenape, that was very, very commonly spoken on the eastern shore of Maryland at some point, just at the time period leading up to English colonization. So good word, we thought. So Mayis always needed a now component. How do we preserve the cultures as they are now? And we focused on the eastern shore of Maryland for a number of reasons, but because there are tribes there, some of which are state recognized, but most of which are not officially state recognized in a formal way. We can talk all about recognition. It's a complicated subject matter and very controversial. I mean, who needs to prove who they are? It makes me feel very uneasy that anyone would have to do that. But for state resources, that is the mechanism that is provided. However, importantly, there are groups that are under the purview of the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs who do not have the official recognition, but they are recognized as being an important part of that commission's representation. I was introduced to Chief Donna Wolfmother Abbott, who is from the Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians, which is located in present-day Dorchester County or Cambridge, Maryland area. Dorchester is one of our bigger counties, actually, it's huge. And Chief Donna and I met very early on in the project. I mentioned that there was an important component that we wanted to build in to help educators talk about tribes in an authentic and clear way. So we were able to cultivate a relationship with her and her tribal council through some presentations and discussion back and forth. And at the same time, we were partnering with the Pocomoke Indian Nation. I have a photo of myself with Chief Norris Howard Sr. And they too have a chief and a tribal council that works with him. And through the partnerships with these two tribes in particular, we were able to construct a very important next component of our project with the help of some grant funding that I was able to get through a state agency, the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. So the first kind of kickoff event that we did as part of that, while we started some of the research and preparations for it prior to this, in August of 2023, we had put out a call to educators of all kinds, K-12 classroom educators, museum educators, librarians, public librarians especially, who would want to participate in an opportunity on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. We based this at Salisbury University, so one of the University of Maryland system. And we invited these educators to come, and even if they were from the region, experience homelands of the Pocomoke Indian Nation and Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians in particular from those tribal perspectives. We basically had the grant funding to have members of the tribal council or leaders speak to and interact with these educators over the course of 4 days. Most of the teachers who came out of this said it was life-changing for them. even people who lived right there near Salisbury. And in some of the other areas adjacent to these particular places that we went to, saw things from different perspectives because of this 4-day workshop. So, and my colleagues and I kind of just stood back and we let the people who are the members of these tribes speak for themselves and talk to these educators. And we kind of helped to put it all together by giving them some ways that they can incorporate this into a lesson plan for their classroom. I had one of my colleagues from the Maryland State Department of Education help them build some models of how they could create learning outcomes that related to some of the places that we went. And there's more to that in a minute, but that was kind of the first baseline, and it was an important pilot project because since then we have been able to take some of the information disseminated from these workshops and put them into a context that teachers across the state can access. So just really quickly about my grant, I want to keep conscious of my time here. I mentioned Drew Shuptar-Rayvis's enormous contribution to this grant. Really could not have been done without somebody who was well-versed in Indigenous studies, but to get someone who is Indigenous to one of the tribes, who successfully interviewed for the position as the oral historian, because he's also a cultural anthropologist and knows about fieldwork, amazing. And he is an amazing person. Hopefully someday you'll have him here at Cafe as a speaker. He's truly, truly a fabulous presenter. We compensated him, obviously, as part of our consultant team. We compensated members of tribes to offer their oral histories to our program. We are in the midst of still working with various people who he got a massive amount of oral histories, twice as many as we expected from this grant. So we're still working through talking to the individual speakers, making sure that what went on records is what they want on record, because that was part of the shared stewardship that we were trying to do very consciously. So our deeds of gift are with those individuals. And yes, they prove the recordings and the transcripts to make sure it reflects what they want to go on record in the archive. And we're not archiving things that they don't want archived. Very important to us and very important to them as well, which is why they trusted us with this. So incredibly grateful to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, and in particular, the 2 heritage areas on the Lower Eastern Shore for enabling this effort, but also making sure that the right people were compensated to do the work. We funded 2 interns out of this as well. So we created an oral histories library. There are a number of the oral histories that are already out there. There are more that are on the way later this year as work progresses. I mentioned that we're still getting quite a few out there. And also some of the recordings that were done last took, we're still working through the system to get all of those on record. So there are more tribes that are represented in the project than are listed here as well. I think I'll wait to play this, but I have a quote from one of the oral histories. My wonderful intern from last summer created a kind of short Instagram post, which is a beautiful reel. I'd like to play it if we have time, but I won't play it now. But I want to paraphrase from one of the interviews, which I think is really critical. Pocomoke Indian Nation tribal counselor Cheryl Howard Dowdy says something really critical in her oral history. And she talks about an uncle of hers who passed down the tradition of storytelling to her as a responsibility for her tribe. And she says, "And so I am a fledgling at storytelling. It's a big responsibility, but I'm using some of my discretionary time now to explore that further. And storytelling, therefore, is an important tradition, especially to me in our group." Again, she's from the Pocomoke Indian Nation. And it's just that kind of talking about life ways, talking about the importance of certain values and activities are fluid throughout these presentations of oral histories. And Drew really was able to write the questions that he felt he should write. And because he was an insider to one of the tribes, the quality of these interviews is amazing. So that's why we're really taking our time on these, because we want everyone to feel comfortable with what's being archived with them. Now I'll go a little faster. So one thing that came out of that 4-day workshop is that 2 of the teachers that participated in particular were engaged in already writing some state level learning outcomes for 4th graders in particular. I think it was 4th graders, yeah, pretty sure. And so their writing at the state level has influenced already other teachers, and they were impacted by being able to witness the homelands on the Eastern Shore. Their teachers on the Eastern Shore, they piloted some lessons in their own classrooms, they wrote some lessons, and were helping to create some guidance as to how to come at things from an Indigenous unit that one in a K-12 classroom might teach. But then also, these 2 teachers were engaged by my colleagues at Maryland Humanities, who had funding from the Library of Congress to create Indigenous Maryland inquiry kits. Those are now out online, and Drew Shuptar-Rayvis and I are both some of the people interviewed in the segments that teach the teachers how to work with these learning modules that contain primary sources for the most part. It's pretty powerful kind of stepping stone here from one thing to another thing to another thing. So again, trying to leverage all of our state partnerships and also enable tribes to consult on additional projects that help raise their visibility. And that was what happened here as well, because Maryland Humanities had funding to get the tribes to vet the content to make sure it was accurate. So future directions for all of this. We definitely have additional Eastern Shore oral histories that are going to go out there. We are continuing to offer aid to K-12 educators in particular, because this is hard for them. Probably none of them learned about Maryland's Indigenous tribes in school. I know I didn't learn much about the tribes that were Indigenous to the area of the country I grew up in Southwest Ohio either. I learned those kinds of things at historical sites, at archaeological sites, right? So it's hard for teachers because they have a lot they've got to pack into a whole year of history teaching. We are currently digitizing photographs from a Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs exhibit, which is a Piscataway focused exhibit. So that's pretty exciting. We're partnering with them. We're trying to get the images out there to Piscataway peoples, and we'll be disseminating those once the exhibit is digitized. We're continuing our work to index records from the Western Shore, focusing on, again, personal names, geographical references that stand out to us as we review records. So a lot of the partnership building applies to any kind of project that you might work with in communities. So I just wanted to have a little bit to say about that. My takeaways from doing this work with any community, don't care who it is. If you work in an archive and you're partnering with communities, the first thing you need to do is be open when you listen. Conversations might yield a lot of opportunities for you to sort of reach out and bridge some things that happen in those communities. Learn what their needs and perspectives are first, and then think about ways that you can build bridges between your organization and this community. Think about what you can offer them. Can it be training? Can it be shared resources of some kind? Can it be expertise? But also, while you're doing this, gain support from your own organization. You know, a lot of you all might be, you know, not the decider at your organization, but realize though that you have power to ask the people who are the deciders if this is something that you can do. I mean, how did I build a website like this? We asked politely to the state archivist, and he said, yes, by all means, keep going with this project. It sounds amazing. You know, but we already presented some of the things we thought, some of the things that we had gotten input from tribes, and had our ducks in a row before we went and asked permission. So those things are important to think about, but I just want you to think about your agency in creating this diplomatic situation, because even as a student, even as a volunteer somewhere, you might be able to help start a conversation at least, you know, but get buy-in from the organization that you are working for before doing this. And show up for partnerships. I cannot tell you how important this is. This is me at a couple of events. You know, last year I was honored to be one of the people invited to the Native American Heritage Month kickoff day at the State House. Not everybody got an invitation for that. And the reason I did is because I work very closely with the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs, and they know how committed I am. And so I got an invitation to be in the room with the governor and head of the governor's office of community initiatives and the chair of Tara Thomas of the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs. I have also shown up at powwows and participated. You can see me dancing here with one of the former commissioners on the commission, Peter Brooks. You know, being present at community events gives you a lot of street cred. And I don't do it just for the street cred. It's fun. And I get to know people and I get to ask them cool questions. And so how nice is that to be able to pair what you do for a living with something that is really interesting culturally? You know, this is exciting for me. I don't get to do this every day. A lot of days I just manage stuff and people. And a lot of that gets to be like day in, day out. This means something. So just think about that when you see opportunities out there. Now, as I get to the end here, I want to leave you with a couple of bits of things that you should think about. First of all, why this work matters. Tribal visibility and recognition. Doing the best you can to provide accurate information in the moment that you know. I mean, yes, sometimes facts can be interpreted multiple ways. Not everybody has the same perspective on things. Remember, I talked about the fact that there are a lot of Indigenous perspectives, and there's not always a lot of agreement, even within communities. There's not always agreement, but trying to be as accurate as possible. And when someone points out a glaring error to you, change it if you can. If you can do anything, change it. Providing resources to educators. If you're working with a community that's not got high visibility, doing things that help teachers tell the right stories to their students, really big. And this is just points to an expansive view of American history as a whole. You know, Native history is American history as well, right? So there are layers of history, and we need to look at all of them to really tell the whole of the story. And now, I really think it's important to not look at the storm clouds. There's a lot of storm clouds right now out in the world. We're all doom scrolling every day. I get it. There's a lot to be concerned about. And I don't want to discount the concerns, because I've had a lot of students come to me and like, do you think you'll be able to still do this? Yes, I do. Very, very emphatically, yes. Why I think this work will continue. First of all, I'm over 50. I may not look it, but I'm over 50. And I've seen the fall of various kinds of culture wars, okay? There's always something. There's always some push button thing that's gonna happen. Does it oscillate? Yes, all the time. things that are in present tense may not be true 3 months from now, especially now. It seems like everything is happening at lightning speed. So just ride that storm out. And remember that if you're an archivist, especially if you're an archivist, your view is the long view, okay? You're here for doing the work now because it matters 100 years from now. So really think about that. Really think about that. And try not to get yourself flustered by the day-to-day. Yes, there are practicalities. The funding is tight right now. Be creative then. Be creative. Don't lose your creativity in face of change. Because change is always going to happen. One of the reasons that I'm hopeful is because when I started my career, when I was an intern archivist, I worked for the Legacy of Slavery in Maryland project when it was just starting. And I worked for the first director, who's now not the director. He went on to do different things, finish his PhD while I was there. And now that project is in the capable hands of my colleague, Chris Haley. And I have seen 25 years of that project and how impactful it has been so far and wide for scholars, yes, but also individuals to be able to find references to their ancestors. Big and important project that I was a small part of that as an intern makes me super proud. So I know that the groundwork that we are laying with this Mayis project continues on at the state archives and stays there. So that even after I have retired, that work's going to continue. I have confidence in that. Stories matter to people. I've given you a lot of examples as to why throughout this talk, but I just want to reiterate that because the stories you tell stay with you. You know, if someone tells me a really powerful story, I'm going to remember it. You know, I have a pretty good memory because I listen to a lot of people's storytell, right? But the really impactful ones, the ones that mean the most to me, I have carried with me. And you know, and if you're being told a story that matters, helps you to position yourself in an understanding of a particular culture, a particular period of history, or a particular topic, you're going to keep that story for year after year. And again, that may be my long view of my career. But I think education is always critical here. So like, I can't tell you how many K-12 educators who've come up and talked to us about this project, because for them, they need this information to feel informed when they step in front of a classroom. Very powerful stuff. And always, the public is going to need to access information, and it should be as accurate as possible. It's not going to be perfect. Don't let that be the enemy of the good, right? You know, we want to try to be accurate in the best way we can. So I'm going to leave you with those positive messages because I really think this is really where we're going. I know there's a lot of nerve right now, and I get it. Trust me, I get it. Because I think I felt a lot of that when I was young too, because there was a lot of tense things around culture when I was in college. But I just want to say, archives are forever, right? Right? Thank you.
Hopefully not another baked question, but I was so intrigued by the Robin Hood thing, and I just kept thinking about that and the names that you showed on the screen. I think some of them were, it's before their name it said Queens, so I'm presuming Queens. I guess my question is, do we know anything about the people who you found? And also, I know you're reaching out to a lot of K-12 teachers. Mm-hmm. That's really important. But what about like early American historians who could really look through something like this?
Yeah, I hope early American stories are looking at my database. I really hope. I'm not an academic, so I'm not able to outreach. So I'm hoping and relying upon the fact that young history students are pointing to this to their teachers and saying, hey, what about this? Yeah, and and we have gotten the word out to some people, but you're absolutely right. Now, as to the individuals, look, what documents are in the Maryland record is what we have. However, smart early American history scholars can probably start to connect some dots about some of these people. And some already have. Because there was for example, one instance last summer where there was a queen whose name is complicated and I can't pronounce Algonquian, so I won't even try, but who is important to the Nanticoke, who are one of the Eastern Shore communities. And my intern last summer, who is a student from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, he went out and found some information that had already been done by scholars who are connected with this tribe, the Nanticoke tribe, and then started emailing them and said, hey, I found some records, and can you tell me a little bit, and learn some things. And he was so excited that he found records that were references to people they knew about, yes, so it wasn't an unknown name, but still, again, by reaching out, by bridging these connections, there's some really great dialogues happening. My job is not to be a scholar and interpret these records as much as I want to, because there's still a public historian very much in me. My degree is in the history of art, but I'm a history scholar and I worked as a public historian for many years before joining the archives. So I would love to have the luxury to do the research. I can't do that because remember, this is only one of the many things that I have to do in my week. But it's important that other people have eyes on those names because maybe it matches up with something they are trying to do right now in their research, whether they're from a tribe or they're an educator or they're a scholar. Great, put eyes on it. That's what I want. Thank you for that question. What other questions? Are there any in the chat?
Yeah, there's one in the chat I'll read out to you, and this is from Ying. And it says, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I have a quick question regarding the role of archivists in supporting community members. I'm currently working with Chinese Americans in Illinois to document their experiences in a community archive context. Many of my participants are struggling with challenges like undocumented immigration status, lack of employment, and oppression under patriarchal systems. What they need most are tangible resources, green cards, health insurance, and jobs.
Yeah.
Things an archive cannot directly provide.
Yeah.
I'm grappling how to reconcile this disconnect between archival work and their immediate needs.
Yeah, that's really hard. One thing that often happens at the state archives is that we are not the agency that answers the question that a patron has when they come to us. Like, I have had questions that are very specific about, a whole host of topics where I know I don't work at the right state agency that does that work, but I know what state agency does that work. So maybe one offering can be, can this person spend some time pulling together a resources list that will enable the folks working with them to find the legal help they need, find the right agency to get that green card or whatever they need. You only can do so much, particularly when, again, you're not the person in the position to decide how resources are being used, but even providing information, which, if you're handy on the internet, that can be a help, right? Even providing that in a packaged way as a handout, or, if they use the internet, great, you could do a page with links, but some way of sharing the information that would be helpful may go a long way for mileage. And that's really the only answer I can give right now, because those are particular circumstances, but I know, the staff that I work with at the archives, even if we don't have the answer at our agency, we always try to tell people, but you can get the answer over here. And sometimes just doing that is just so helpful to anyone, a patron in our reference department, but a community member as well. So that's my best answer for that question, which is a really good one. Yes. Hello.
I don't have a question, but I was thinking about, my background is community archives.
Right.
And I was thinking about when you participated in a program like that, that is what happens. You go out to the community and there's other things. You're an archivist and they're telling you their building is falling down,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So you'll be surprised as the resources come together, you can program around that.
Yeah.
And bring the people to the communities to ask those questions directly to them.
Absolutely.
Sending them an email. Being more personable with those communities really helps us engage them in that trust that we need.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, could an archivist stage an event where they bring the people to the resources they need, or maybe could be
I know it's a
possible.
lot of work,
It's a
but
great.
it's beneficial.
It's a lot of work, but it is super good. And again, that's a way of showing up, right?
Yeah.
That I was talking about. It's a way of showing up. Yeah. And thank you for that.
Showing up for it.
Yeah. What else?
There's another question in the
Sure.
chat. If you'd like. Hi Maria, my question is loaded, so without naming names. Can you talk about how you've handled conflict between and or within tribes?
Yeah.
Feel free to pass.
So I mean, let me just say that, that is one thing that happens when you engage in diplomacy is you will find out scuttlebutt that's going on between this person and this person, and you cannot get involved. You are not an insider. Don't do it. Don't do it. And, be polite, listen to people if they need to talk, that's fine. I have no problems with people telling me stuff. I sometimes really don't want to hear all of the inside. But the main thing is, look, I work for a state agency, okay? So there are rules and ethics that govern my work. And there are things I can do and there are things I cannot do. But my response to that situation, and it comes up now and again, is don't get in the middle of arguments. Same thing on a playground. If two people are fighting it out, call the referee, but don't get involved, right? And I think that is, I have to work through state government channels, and that means that I'm responsible to a lot of different constituencies, and some of those may be within groups as much as outside of groups. And understanding that the colonial system has created fractures in communities and other things have created fractures within communities, and just sitting with that and knowing that you cannot get involved or take sides. I work with the people who are willingly able and interested in collaborating with me. I obviously have a protocol by which I sort of say, is this authentic information I'm getting, or is this a personal perspective that I am getting? And, when it comes from person who represents a tribe legally, they are part of a governing body of a tribe, that is a different thing than when I'm just having a one-on-one discussion with somebody. And that's the best you can do. And it is just beholden to you as a person who's engaging in diplomacy to just practice some cultural awareness and realize you can't get in the middle of something when you are not an insider, and you will never be an insider. Now, if you are a tribal member who's doing this work, that's a whole different matter. And I am not that person. I'm not a member of a tribe. I just happen to be an information professional and a public historian who is really engaged in trying to bring people together in partnership so that this work can continue. But I can't get involved in the inter-tribal conflicts or extra-tribal conflicts, because there are definitely various tribes who've been part of the projects we have worked on who do not necessarily like each other either, for a variety of reasons, some of which might be evidenced in some of the slides that I'm showing you, okay? Because there's overlap, right? It's complicated. That's a great question, though. Thank you for that question. It's definitely something to think about. Yes?
I have a question. So, for the maps that you show where they have overlapping spheres of influence,
Yeah.
is that like a static type where it's just one time period, or is it multiple time periods?
So I think it's kind of multiple time periods, and if you read the fine print on the maps, you'll get some more information about that. So I don't want to put words in the mouth of the people who created those maps, but I work very closely with Dr. Ryan Coons from the State Arts Council, and he was sort of the instigator of that project and the leader of it in engaging in the consultation with the various tribes who worked with him. It is, it is sort of the geographical spheres of influence in the moment at which the English colonists arrived that most of those maps are sort of trying to address. Because we cannot know, because there's no historical written records and there's only oral traditions, all of the areas that might encompass a geographical sphere of influence. But to the best knowledge of the tribal consultants and the historical records that could be found, those are the best maps that have been created. I do know that in consultations with tribes kind of later on, he's updated some of those maps and will probably continue to do so, because much like my project is a work in progress. So that's a great question. But, again, putting out information as accurate at the moment that you know it, and realizing and being humble to the fact that that may need to change if there's something that changes significantly, or you're being asked to look at things from a different perspective. Thank you.